All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up here nice and early today. The topic that we're going to be going over is hemp seed genetics, certification, and related laws and regulations. Kind of a mouthful there. But we're going to get started. I'm Mike Leago with iHEMPx, International Hemp Exchange. We're going to be here talking about 2019 and the state of affairs when it comes to hemp seeds and genetics. Topic of my discussion is kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, which I think is what the experience was this season. A little bit about me is I'm the founder of the International Hemp Exchange. I'm also the chief operating officer over at High Grade Hemp Seed. International Hemp Exchange was the first licensed and bonded hemp broker in the U.S. Back in 2016. We've touched quite a bit of the supply chain from R&D on genetics, breeding genetics, producing seeds, producing clones, seedlings, farming, farm services. We don't really touch extraction, and then we're associated with a number of consumer brands downstream. What we ran into in 2019, particularly here in Oregon, was a lot of issues when it came to genetics. There's no real hard numbers that we've been able to come up with, but when you start with that 500,000 number of acres that were registered in 2019, it seems like the number that actually got planted was under 150,000 acres. From there, how much actually made it to the finish line is questionable. But along the way, what we saw was a lot of failure based on genetics, based on seed procurement, deal flow in that arena. We think that cost farmers a lot of money, hurt the industry significantly, and a lot of people are still reeling from it. And a number of different things were happening, and I think a lot of it comes back to some bad actors coming in and taking advantage of farmers in a number of different ways. There were seeds that were sold prematurely that didn't have proper germination rates, hadn't been able to break through dormancy yet. There were people out there marketing non-feminized seeds as feminized, folks selling genetics that didn't perform as advertised when it came to CBD levels, CBG levels. A lot of people learned hard lessons at the end of the season when it came to the THC levels. And so there was failures the whole way. Some of the farmers were able to recover if they found out early on that they'd made a bad purchase. They were able to pivot, reinvest, find a good provider, and get seeds in the ground. A lot of farmers weren't so fortunate and had that experience partway through the season when they realized something was wrong or their stand was poor. Others, it came in August, September when they started realizing their field was full of males. So the list goes on, and all the way down to the end of the season. Oregon, we had a rainy season in the Willamette Valley. Not every genetic was suited for that. A lot of people learn that if you have a lot of genetics that want to come down in middle of September, late September, and it rains all of September, you're going to be dealing with a really moldy crop. So that's kind of, what we were seeing and hearing in the seed industry this past season. When it comes to looking out and sourcing genetics this year, if you're on the hunt for a good seed provider or trying to advise your friends, your neighbors, there's a number of things to look out for. The first thing is a track record. Every year there's been a handful more companies that hit the scene that have reputable genetics that are doing good breeding. This year we're seeing a lot of companies hit and pop up out of nowhere, all of a sudden saying they're breeders, all of a sudden, having a strain that you haven't heard of, maybe a strain that you have. Folks that are taking seed that was accidentally pollinated out in their field, cleaning it out of their biomass, marketing it to farmers, not really knowing what it was, what pollen was applied, how it's going to perform. So you need to be careful right now. And so going for track record, going for science-backed sellers that are going to be able to provide you with multiple years worth of COAs, multiple years of consistent germination rates, feminization rates. That's what you really want to be looking for. Another thing when it comes to kind of vetting a supplier is, are these guys breeding unique and novel varieties, or are they selling the same thing that other breeders had or other breeders created? Sometimes that's a sign of somebody that just had some genetics, Maybe they intended on pollinating, maybe they didn't, but now they're selling this variety perhaps without permission of the original breeder. And so those are things that can kind of be indicators for a farmer as to whether they're working with a reputable provider or not. You know, when you're looking at feminization rates in this industry right now, you know, I think for Oregon state standards, we've talked about 99.9% feminized. A good breeder is more likely going to have something like 99.98% feminized. That's going to be about 1 in 4,000 plants that are going to show signs of being a male. You can get that number up to 1 in 7,000, 1 in 8,000. So another thing to think about, you know, it's as you look at that over a large farm, a lot of acres, that's a lot of plants that you have to go out there and pick out, more chances for pollination, which is ultimately going to lower the quality and value of your crop. Fair pricing right now, you know, I think what we're seeing this season on feminized CBD seeds are going to be in that probably 50 cents to 75-cent price range. CBG is trending at about $1. Auto flowers anywhere from 25 cents to 50 cents a seed for feminized. So if you're operating in that kind of range, you should be getting a fair shake. Certification, you know, we're going to be talking a little bit about that today, I think, across the board. Certification right now means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when customers ask us if our seed is certified, we usually respond with which certification are you talking about, because every state's looking at it a little bit differently. Currently, AOSCA, you know, isn't certifying feminized hemp seed. So, you know, OSU right now, I know Elizabeth's going to speak on it a little bit, but they've got a program for certified hemp seed. We're currently going through that. We're going to have a feminized CBG seed that's certified out of their program pretty soon. But that program is going to be different than Colorado, which is going to be different than, you know, what they're going to set up in Texas, which is going to be, you know, hopefully all in line with what AOSCA wants, but it's going to be a process of getting it certified. So, you know, learning more about what that means. It doesn't just mean that you have a seed breeder license or a seed seller license. You know, certified seed is usually involving, you know, third party, usually a research institution that's getting involved in helping with that certification process. We'll see a lot more in coming years, but excited to be part of the OSU program here this year that's certifying seeds in Oregon. And so, yeah, I guess that's this slide as well. But, you know, one thing to think about here is, you know, Colorado, where I'm from, is they've got a seed certification program as well, but they don't certify feminized seeds. And right now what the industry is really being driven by is feminized seeds. So if you're only certifying traditional seed, male, female, you know, you end up in a little bit of a situation than where the industry wants to be, where the industry's heading. So it's exciting that OSU is looking at the details of feminized seed and, you know, what it entails and what the, you know, particulars are for our industry, because, you know, unlike other crops, we have kind of a unique set of circumstances where we're creating seed, where we have other farms around us that are producing pollen. So that's another piece of the component when you're looking at sourcing genetics is when were these seeds produced? If you're buying seed that was produced in the traditional summer season, if that was outdoors, there's a very high probability that that seed was cross-contaminated with other pollen from a neighboring farm. You're not going to get what you want. Even if you're in a greenhouse and producing seed that time of year, there's a good chance that pollen could have snuck into that greenhouse. So either producing in a sealed environment if you're going to be producing seed that time of year, or purchasing seed that was produced that time of year, or you're looking for seed that was bred and produced off-season, so when pollen isn't flying around from neighboring farms. And so that's something that, you know, we've talked about with OSU in the seed certification subcommittee is what are these radiuses? What makes sense for if you're producing seed on one farm, how far away do you need to be from the other one? You know, we've realized that this pollen can travel great distances. We don't know that it necessarily always does, but what is that safe number? So these are all things that are currently being kind of figured out and discussed, and there should be opportunities for public and farmers to provide some input as well. When it comes to this next season, I think everybody has heard a bit about the USDA changes, and particularly in Oregon, it's a hot subject on whether it's going to be total THC that's measured versus Delta 9. The new USDA rules want to get the industry moving over to total THC testing rather than just looking at the Delta 9 THC. The timing's changed a little bit for when you test and which pieces of the plant you test. So folks are a little bit concerned. It's a big change for guys that were growing under the Delta 9 THC scenario where, you really had quite a bit of a buffer. As a result, some states are opting not to fall into the USDA rules and guidelines for this season and are choosing to continue under the 2014 Farm Bill. I believe that that's a possibility through October, and so essentially the rules aren't changing. But what that's doing is creating kind of a dynamic landscape across the country where some states are falling under Delta 9, some states are falling under total THC, interstate transport, still a little bit of a gray area. So we'll see that start to shake out this year, but what it's looking like right now is that a lot of states are going to continue their program as they did last year, which means we're going to have a mix of states doing Delta 9 versus total THC, and it's looking like Oregon's going to be still in that Delta 9 category. So, it's another year of being able to operate a little bit in that kind of gray area, but, a lot of farmers at the same time are looking towards compliance and what are the options long term. And so that takes us into kind of the next category, which is the CBG surge that we're hearing about. And there's a lot of hype and discussion around CBG genetics right now. There's more companies, including ours, that are able to release genetics. We've been working on ours since 2016. The interesting thing that we're finding with most of the CBG varieties is that they don't want to produce THC. So even if you push them, 12 weeks, they're not going to, exceed much over 0.2% total THC and deliver a pretty good percentage of CBG, anywhere in that 12 to 18%, 12 to 20%, depending on your varieties. So that's given farmers an option that they feel like is a safer bet when it comes to knowing they're going to fall within compliance. But it's a new cannabinoid, at least new to consumers. So there's going to be a lot of CBG produced this next year, which is a great thing. But the consumer demand needs to pick up to receive that. And so there's more research being done. There's more studies coming out. There's a lot of exciting news, in regards to CBG. But it's not going to be a scenario of if you just build it, they will come necessarily. So there's going to be a process of the industry evolving and the whole supply chain kind of recognizing this opportunity and getting it into more consumer products, educating consumers, and then working its way back up the supply chain. But it is a really phenomenal genetic in regards to its THC level. So we're going to see that one growing more around the world as well, because it's going to be compliant for Europe and Canada. So expect to see some of those CBG varieties popping up on the EU and Canadian certified list. And that's it for my piece of the discussion. Up next is Elizabeth with OSU. So I'm going to go ahead and get her slide set up.
Good morning. I'll just introduce myself while Mike is working on the slides. My name is Elizabeth Savory. I manage the plant health and seed regulatory programs for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And I'm going to be talking today about the Federal Seed Act, Oregon seed laws, and how they relate to hemp, and how the hemp rules and regulations sort of interact with that, and then some information about, the basics of seed labeling, seed testing, and just a little overview of what you need to do if you're buying or selling seed and what you should look for, somewhat related to what Mike was talking about, about proven track record and how you know that you're purchasing good seed, things to look for. Oh, thank you. So, just going to move on. So just so we're all on the same page, I find when having to deal with rules and regulations, it's nice to define things so we're all talking about the same thing. So what is hemp seed? And so in this case, we're talking about seed that is intended to be sold for planting. It's unprocessed. It can germinate. And it was harvested from hemp plants that have been tested pre-harvest and found to contain no more than 0.3% THC. I'm not going to touch on testing rules or Oregon regulations. Sunny Summers, our cannabis policy coordinator, will be giving a talk at 10. So if you have any questions about the intricacies of that or the state plan, please give them to her. I am the seed and disease person. So the Federal Seed Act, hemp's actually been in the Federal Seed Act, I think, since it was written. Recognized as an agricultural seed kind. And then in Oregon law, we define hemp as an agricultural seed. So any rule or regulation that applies to any other agricultural seed kind, so grass seed, corn, what have you, applies to hemp. And so this goes for record keeping, labeling, any civil penalties around those things, any misleading, sales or what have you, all applies to hemp seed. So this is just a quick diagram that I put together that what we were trying to do was go through the cycle of producing hemp seed and help people figure out when they needed to register, what licenses they might need, where they would get testing, and how they would get testing. And so this is just a really brief overview. You all know that in order to produce hemp seed in Oregon, you have to be registered with the Department of Ag. You need a hemp grower registration and a seed producer registration. You produce your crop. You have to have your testing done, and then we'll switch down to when we get into the seed. And so we're going to talk about seed testing very briefly, what kind of labs offer those services, what you need to have tested in order to be able to put it on your label. And so really what this all comes down to is seed has to be labeled, and it has to be labeled with a certain number of things because it's required by the Federal Seed Act, and helping you figure out how to get to that point. And then, seed licenses, if you're selling seed, I have a slide a little later and a handout that explains when you need a license, when you don't, what kind of hemp registration you need to make sure that you are, you have all of those ducks in your row. Excuse me. So first of all, I think the most important thing from the Federal Seed Act perspective and from the perspective of somebody who's selling seed so that you're in compliance, and then also if you're buying seed, to know what to look for to make sure that you're getting that quality that you're looking for, and that your fem rate's going to be what it says on the label, that you're not going to have issues with high THC, what have you. The label should be your Bible. So all of these things listed here are what is required by the Federal Seed Act and Oregon seed law to be on that label. Kind, variety, a lot number, how much is in that bag of seed, and then these pure seed, inert, other crop, weed seed, germination, dormant, origin, test date. All of those things are derived from the testing that is required to be done on that seed lot. So I'm going to talk first quickly just about brands and varieties at a very, very high level. Oregon allows brands on seed. Other states may not, so you need to check the laws of the other states. A brand is different than a variety, and a brand cannot be so similar with a variety name that it could be confused. And so kind down here, so this is a wheat example, but just imagine kind says hemp, and then variety, we can still use Prairie Road. Those variety names are unique. A seed kind, so there can only be one hemp Prairie Road. There can't be two. And that variety name is exclusive to that variety and is permanent. There are very few examples in which a variety name goes away. If you've ever been involved in any other seed businesses in Oregon, you might know this very well. We have some issues with tall fescue varieties that have variety name issues and annual ryegrass. So if you're aware of those, you know what I'm talking about. So I think this is very important too, that closely related species can't have the same variety names. So I'm going to use tall fescue and red fescue as an example. So those are both grass seeds. They both are going to be in turf grass varieties. You couldn't have a Prairie Road red fescue and a Prairie Road tall fescue. So probably you couldn't have a Prairie Road hemp variety and a Prairie Road marijuana variety, because those are actually the same species. So that wouldn't fly. So I think there's going to be a lot of issues in variety name and branding that's going to come down the road. And so I just wanted to make you all aware of this as you're moving forward to developing new varieties, that there are rules around how you name things and who gets to name things and how those variety names work. So a lot of this information is available on the web. We have a seed labeling webpage that describes some of this briefly, but also the USDA. There are variety naming guidelines out there, so you can comply with the Federal Seed Act. You can apply for a variety name, and then they actually have a list of all the known. It doesn't have every known variety on it, but it has a lot of them. Last time I looked, it had almost 70,000 variety names that have been prescribed to seed kind. So these are really important resources that you should look at. Okay. So the next thing on the label was purity. So this is pure seed germination. The agency, we get a lot of questions about seed testing and who provides testing. And so I just put this slide together quickly just to give everyone an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about purity. I know that in general, hemp seed is hand cleaned and it's very clean. That's not the case in other seed kinds. Some of these rules came out of 55,000 pound lots of turf grass that, was scooped up with a combine. But basically, a purity exam separates the different seed components, and then on your label, you're reporting these by weight. The seed testing rules for purity and also for viability, so germination, those are developed by some of them are defined in the Federal Seed Act, and then there's also an association called the Association of Official Seed Analysts. And the AOSA develops the default rules for the United States. So every seed kind has a set of rules, and AOSA member labs and registered seed technologists follow those rules so that you know that a germination rate on a bag of seed that should be the same, or at least the way it was determined is consistent for all that kind of seed in the United States. So this is part of that quality control thing. You want to look for seed that has been tested appropriately, and it is okay to ask your supplier for those tests. This happens all the time in the grass seed world, which is where I'm most familiar with. A lot of times it's labeled on the bag, but the purchaser will say, well, I want to see the test too. What labs did that come from? So just in terms of quality control, this is one thing you can look for if you're concerned about the purity and the quality of your seed. So basically in a purity exam, so the bottom is the original pile of seed. You sort it out. So you've got pure seed, you've got other crop. Inert is anything that's not seed or seed that won't grow. And then you separate out the weed seeds. And so often you'll see, if you go to Lowe's and you buy a bag of turfgrass seed, you'll see the weed seeds listed. And if they're not noxious or restricted or prohibited, they'll just be in the regular weed seed section, but there might be a list on there of the more invasive or hazardous seeds. And so every state has lists of prohibited and noxious weed seeds. Oregon has one, it's in rule, so it's something that it's determined by the Dean of the College of Agriculture and the ODA in collaboration with the industry. These are the things that we don't want in our state. And then there's also something called All States Noxious, which is the list of things that's banned by every state. And so this is what these seed technologists are looking for. And it is a violation of both the Federal Seed Act and Oregon law to not list these or to sell seed that has noxious weeds in it. So back to the hemp seed label, just to wrap this up. There are some other things on here that I'm not going to go over, but you can see you have to have your name, the company that's selling the seed. That there are test dates. There's requirements for how soon before germination has to be tested within a certain amount of time to be put on the label. In Oregon, it's 18 months. So any germ test older than 18 months, you'd have to retest that seed and relabel it. So this all comes back to the fact that the seed label is all about consumer protection. It's about truth in labeling, that what's in that bag is what the label says is what you're getting. And it is a violation of Oregon law to label seed with anything that is false or misleading. So if you're claiming a 99.8% fem rate, it better be a 99.8% fem rate, or that's a violation of the law. And so that protects the purchaser, making sure that you're getting what you buy, and it also puts the onus on the person selling the seed to make sure that the label is accurate. So in addition to selling seed, the label, there's also some other things that in terms of licenses and registrations that you need. So this table just sort of summarizes the Oregon Department of Ag registration requirements, that's what's on the top, and then how you may be involved with the sale of hemp seed. So if you're a cleaner, a processor, you need to be a hemp handler, and you need to be a hemp seed producer. So I know they just recently changed a lot of the things around the registration requirements, but the basics of them haven't changed. If you're selling seed that you produce yourself only, you don't need to be a seed dealer, but you do need to be a registered grower, perhaps a handler, and then a seed producer. If you're a seed broker and you don't actually ever take possession of the seed, but you're selling it in the state of Oregon, you are a wholesale seed dealer. And it doesn't matter if your business is in Oregon or if it's in California or Mexico. If you're selling, offering for sale, or exposing seed for sale in the state, you need to be a registered wholesale seed dealer. If you're taking possession of the seed in any way, if you're not growing it, you are a handler, because viable hemp seed is legally defined as hemp. So some entities offer services for hemp growers or for hemp seed. They may not be growing it, they might not be selling it, but technically if you're in possession, you should be a handler. And then just the seed licenses. So we've got two different kinds of seed licenses, and that's retail and wholesale. In general, retail seed dealers are Lowe's, Home Depot, Target, places that are selling to the end consumer, and wholesalers are selling to those entities, or they're contracting with people to produce seed. So there's some intricacies there, and if anyone has any questions, I can help you navigate through what kind of seed license you might need, but those are the sort of big picture things. Okay, so back to purchasing hemp seed. These are the sorts of things, just quickly, that I think that anyone buying seed, whether it's hemp seed or not, should be looking for to make sure that they are getting what they intend to purchase. So is there a Federal Seed Act compliant label? So that image I showed you earlier, you should be looking for all of those things. You should ask if you want to see the purity and germination test results. Are there regulatory tests for the plants that the seed was harvested from? One of the things that I saw the most this year when people were calling the seed regulatory program about issues with hemp seed was that they purchased something and it looked good on paper, and then they planted it and the THC was through the roof. Well, when I asked them, so did you have a label? Most of them said no. I said, well, did they have a COA? What did it look like? Well, maybe it was from the seed. That doesn't work. Maybe it was for dried plants. That doesn't work. It has to be the pre-harvest regulatory test. I mean, it might not always be perfect. I think we all know that the environment and a lot of things can play a role in the THC level that the plants ultimately produce. But there are things you can do to be more on the side that you're going to get what you wanted. And then there's this question of certification. So Mike mentioned that OSU is working on a certification program for hemp, and then there's this question of what does certified mean? Well, in my world, in the Department of Ag, I think I can name 10 different kinds of certification, and they all mean completely different things. So we'll start with a couple basics. So organic. I see a lot of ads for organic certified seed. I don't think there's that much organic certified hemp seed out there. But if you want to know, the USDA has an integrity database. And you can go in and put hemp seed in, you put the company name in, and you can see if they're actually certified by an entity in Oregon or whatever state they might be in. So if you're interested in organic hemp seed, I would check there. But there is a difference, too, between USDA certified organic and produced with organic practices. You can say you've been produced with organic practices without being certified. But if you're putting the USDA label on there, or you should, that there's actually a big process that you have to go through. And then seed certification. So if you're interested in the seed cert rules, they're on the OSU website. There are draft rules that we have so Mike and I are on the Oregon Hemp Seed Certification Advisory Board. A draft set of rules are being adopted in February. So we haven't adopted rules yet, so there cannot be any Oregon certified seed produced right now. In a couple months there will be, because we'll have rules in place and there'll be a process. But right now, if someone is claiming that they've got certified Oregon produced seed, it does not exist. Colorado has a program. That seed could be certified or be, would be, you could believe that, but Oregon does not. And I can't speak for any other states because I'm not aware at the moment. But, and as Mike also said, we've got AOSCA, which is I can't remember what the acronym is, but basically it's the certification board. And they're the ones who do the variety reviews and set baseline standards for all commodities. And so as he said, there's going to be a base standard that you can be guaranteed that any certification program has. But every state has the opportunity to increase that standard. They can't go below, but they can increase it. So it's a really good thing to be aware of, especially around FEM rates, because as far as I'm aware, Oregon's the only state that's adding that at the moment. So just buyer beware. And then the other thing, I found this on an ad the other day. The Association of Official Seed Analysts has certified our seed at 99.96% pure with a 98% germination rate. The AOSA doesn't certify anybody. They're an association of labs. They develop standards. So this would be considered misleading or flat out false. The label could say 99.96% pure, 98% germination rate. That is fine. But AOSA does not certify anybody. So just be very careful when you're reading literature that you know what it means and what you're getting, because there's a lot of misinformation out there around hemp seed. And I think it's leading to a lot of the issues that growers are facing when their crops don't perform as they expected. So I'm just going to talk really quickly about exporting seed, because I also work closely with APHIS. My lab is a phytosanitary testing lab for seed. We don't do purity and germination. That's done by several other labs. But if you're interested in exporting your seed to another country, please come talk to me. This is a really big picture overview. There's a lot more going on here, but I'm trying to keep my talk short, and I think I'm failing. But basically, you just need to know what the phytosanitary requirements of your country are. And they vary. Every country has the opportunity to set those standards for themselves. There are a lot of resources where you can figure this out. What I want to caution people on is that these requirements could include in-season inspections, so a field inspection while your crop is being grown to say it's free from a disease, some sort of disease testing of the seed itself, declarations of free from, so is Oregon free from Pseudomonas syringicannabina? It is not. So there are some things like that where we have to, we can't always make a statement, so you may not be able to export your seed to that country because we have that disease or that insect. Some countries also require treatment. I don't know if anyone here has tried to export to Australia, but you have to hot water treat your seed. There is no getting around that requirement. You might also need an import permit, which could outline additional requirements above and beyond the base standards that those countries may have set for seed. And speaking of Australia, you have to have a drug import permit too, which is separate from any phytosanitary issue. You may need some special tags through the International Seed Testing Association. These are affectionately called the blue and orange tags. And there are some labs in Oregon that will do this test for you. And then you need a visual inspection within 30 days of shipment, and that has to be done by ODA or the USDA. And then you have to have all of these ducks in your rows neatly in order to be able to apply for a phyto, and that phytosanitary certificate goes with your shipment. So if anyone's interested, please come talk to me. I know it was a lot of information in a really short amount of time, but it's that's a big picture overview from like maybe this level of buying, selling, purchasing, and exporting seed. And then just quickly, there are a lot of programs at ODA that touch on hemp seed. We've got the hemp program, we've got our cannabis policy coordinator, Sunny Summers, and then I run the seed regulatory and the plant health program. So any one of us would be able to help anybody with any of these issues. Likely you'll just get forwarded to the right person, but we have a lot of people who are working very hard to support the hemp industry, and we're always here and happy to help. Thank you.
We good to go? All right. Almost there we are. Okay, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dale Hunt. I am a patent attorney, but before I went to law school, I studied botany and did a master's degree in plant genetics and did a PhD in molecular and cell biology studying seed development. By then I knew I didn't want to be a professor, so I went to law school. And I've been a patent attorney working with plant breeders and a lot of other different kinds of clients for over 23 years. Until cannabis came along, I was mostly working in the fruit and flower industries, but I did work with companies that were world leaders in developing good genetics for premium fruits or flowers, and that did intellectual property protection and worldwide commercialization. I wouldn't say worldwide, but a good 20 countries or more, depending on the cultivar. So I think it's an exciting time to be in this industry because it's very early stages. It is going to become a worldwide industry, and intellectual property is going to become a very important thing. I worked in a lot of law firms, and then last year, about a year and 2 weeks ago, I started my own law firm. It's called Plant and Planet Law Firm. And then I also just started a startup company called Breeders Best. So I'm the CEO of a startup company that is focused on working with independent plant breeders, primarily cannabis breeders, to, if they don't have their own way of protecting and commercializing their seeds, if they just want to be breeders and not be business people, we help them protect their cultivars, and then we commercialize them for them. We help them get their special genetics out to the world. So that's a very new company, but we're excited about what we can do with that company. All right. I've heard that accountants the tax accountants love how complicated the tax code is because it keeps them employed. I can't begin to say that the IP system for plants in the U.S. is nearly as complicated as the tax code, but it is complicated enough that you really do need to at least get an overview like this and maybe talk to somebody who's done it a few times. I see a lot of mistakes made in this space. And what's interesting about this is that the system in the U.S. is super complicated, and the rest of the world is quite standardized and follows one of the three options you have for protecting plant cultivars in the U.S. So the U.S. really is unusual in that way. It's almost genuinely unique in that way, but there are a couple of little exceptions here and there. But there are two different federal agencies that grant IP on plant cultivars and plant genetics, and really three kinds of protection within those two agencies. So the USDA grants plant variety protection certificates. We'll talk about those. And then the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office grants plant patents and utility patents. And we will also talk about those. Now, it's great if you just want to throw money at IP protection and get all three, but it's not always the case. In fact, it's quite often not the case that all three really constitute a good fit. There is, in many cases, one kind of protection that is suitable and the others don't really get you there. In other cases, there are situations where it might make sense to have two or even three if you're not budget sensitive, but they all have their different strengths and weaknesses, and so we'll talk about that a little bit. Oh, and I think I said the rest of the world is, it's pretty flat. There is one international convention that around 75 countries and a couple of regional authorities follow, that is patterned after the same model legislation as the USDA Plant Variety Protection Act. So if you know how USDA PVP works, that's how the rest of the world works. Except that, well, we'll get into a little bit of esoterica. Okay, here it's esoterica time. USDA PVP, up until the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, only was available for seed propagated cultivars. It was not available for asexually propagated cultivars. Now, if you did both, if you had a plant like cannabis that you could propagate either way commercially, then you could avail yourself of that protection. But it was only relevant to the seed aspect of that reproduction. With the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, the USDA kind of harmonized, the USDA's system is harmonized with the rest of the world by being available for sexually or asexually propagated plants. There's still a little bit of an implementation problem, though, because USDA is not equipped to examine sexually propagated or asexually propagated plants. In the rest of the world, if you're trying to protect, say, any kind of plant in, say, Chile, you've got to get what are called witness plants to Chile, get them through phytosanitary regulation, and get them identify the physical location where they will be grown, and then an examiner goes and checks them for 3 things. It's called a DUS test: distinctness, uniformity, and stability. So it's got to be distinct from other known varieties, including the parents. It's got to be uniform across a generation. It can't be segregating, basically. And it's got to be stable from one generation to the next. If it passes those 3 tests, then, then as long as there's actual genuine novelty, meaning, let's say it could be very distinct from anything else that's known. But if it's been sold or available to the public for more than a year before you filed your application, then it lacks novelty. Even if it's distinct, it will be too late to apply for it. One other thing about the rest of the world is that the way UPOV works, this international convention, your deadline for filing an application is 1 year from the first commercialization or public availability in the country where you're filing, or where that commercialization occurred, or 4 years from its first occurrence anywhere. So let's suppose that we market something this year, then our deadline for the U.S., and we only market it in the U.S. Our deadline in the U.S. is a year from now, and our deadline in the rest of the world is 4 years from now, unless we commercialize somewhere else in the meantime. So in working with clients in this capacity, we have to kind of quarterly survey them and say, hey, have you made this plant available to the public anywhere in the world? What's your marketing going on? We do distinguish between test growing and marketing, but if you're marketing, if the plants themselves are available to the public, then we need to docket a deadline for filing for your rights in that country. All right, there's one other really, really important thing about the UPOV system, which is the USDA Plant Variety Protection. It has 2 exemptions that don't exist in the patent system, and that's really important. One exemption is that it's perfectly permissible it's not an infringement of a protected variety to use that variety in a breeding program, as long as you don't make what is called an essentially derived variety. If you breed something and then you backcross it so much that you can't really distinguish it from the protected variety, then it's essentially derived and it will be an infringement. But if you use it as a parent and then you just get its genetic contribution and you do a lot of selection and bring in other parents, that's perfectly permissible. It's not an infringement of the Plant Variety Protection Act. So that's an important exemption. It's kind of a hole in your rights. You can plug that hole in the U.S. with an agreement that restricts someone from breeding, that's limited, it's a conditional sale. Some countries won't even let you do that. They're so committed in terms of public policy to that freedom to continue to develop new varieties that it's a contract that attempts to do that won't be enforceable. And then the other exemption is the so-called farmer's exemption, that if you buy an acre's worth of seeds from someone who has protection, plant variety protection, you're allowed to save an acre's worth of seeds from that harvest and replant them and replant them and replant. It's not an infringement to replant your field with the same acreage. If you try to bulk up the seeds and plant 2 acres or 5 acres, or if you save some seed and sell it to a third party, those are infringements. But the farmer's exemption allows you to save your seed and replant it. All right, that's kind of a lot on USDA PVP. We'll go a little bit faster here. A U.S. plant patent I think of it as like a copyright on a plant. It really is, it only protects clonal copies of an exact genotype. So if it's similar, but isn't the, if it isn't a clonal copy, not an infringement. The other thing I think was on the slide but I didn't mention is that for a USDA plant variety protection certificate, you have to make a seed deposit. The plant patent statute doesn't require any kind of a deposit. This is all kind of an on-paper examination. You're supposed to describe the cultivar in as much detail as you possibly can. You file the application with a big, thorough botanical description. You may throw in some chemical, or you throw in a COA or some DNA fingerprint, but you're not required to. And then the examiner will come back and say, I want more. I want to know, is the underside of the third leaf, is it hairy or not? What color is the petiole? They ask all kinds of things like that. So they just push you to give a really thorough description, and no matter how thorough you are, they always try to find something that you could add to it. So I think that's all we need to do with plant patents. I think I did. Oh, there we go. Okay. The third option is a utility patent. That treats a cultivar or a genetic selection as an invention. It can also be it can be a seed line. It can be anything that would qualify as a cultivar that is stable enough to be a cultivar. You could seek a utility patent on it. And the reason this matters is that with a utility patent, you can claim it a lot of ways. You can claim it in a breeding program. You can claim, using this cultivar in a breeding program. You can claim progeny. You can claim extracts, seeds, all kinds of things. You can be very creative with the claiming. So you can, as long as the patentable subject matter is available for that, you can protect it in a lot of different ways. The other thing is, it was on the slide, but I didn't mention it, is that the USDA can, because it requires seed deposits in a USDA authorized facility, it will not accept anything that isn't industrial hemp. You cannot protect high THC cannabis yet with a USDA certificate. You can, the USPTO is agnostic about THC levels. They don't care. You do have to make a deposit. If you're protecting a particular cultivar with a utility patent, you do have to make a deposit. That's kind of complicated because the depository that accepts it is the one that people usually uses in Scotland. So how they get their high THC seeds there, that's one of those things that I don't know has been well established or certainly hasn't been policed. All right, this is just a really quick overview comparing the three different kinds of protection. USDA is only available for industrial hemp, and it has those important exemptions. Plant patent doesn't care about THC levels, doesn't require a seed deposit, but it only protects clonal copies. Not even things that are close if they're not clone. It's very much like a copyright. And then a utility patent gives you a lot of flexibility. But it does require a biological deposit. Usually takes a little longer to get, a little bit more expensive. All right. So when you're deciding what to do for IP protection for your cannabis cultivar, for your hemp, what should you do? Well, you should just call me. But if you don't want to call me, ask yourself, first of all, what are you going to sell? If you're selling seeds, don't get a plant patent. Well, if that's all you're selling, don't get a plant patent because seeds would not infringe. The plant patent is just for clones. If you're selling only clones, then a plant patent might be a really good fit. And among those three options, it's maybe a little bit less expensive than a PVP certificate, depending on how it's handled. It can be about the same ballpark price. But the prosecution, the examination process is pretty simple, and you don't have to make a deposit. If you're selling all these things, though, you'd probably be well advised to get a utility patent because you close the loophole on those exemptions that come with a PVP certificate. You can block people from breeding. You can block people from saving seed to replant. If the patent office will let you claim it that way. That's all a negotiation based on what's come before. Okay, yeah, there's number one is what are you going to sell. The other number one is do you want to restrict breeding with the cultivar, and the other number one is do you want to restrict replanting. these are all really important. That's why they're all number one, I guess. I think we had a formatting problem. The last thing I'll say, though, are we out of time yet? Okay, good. Well, hope we're not. This is really important. I've seen, I have, also I didn't mention, I have a blog at plantlaw.com that's kind of a lot of topics for people who want to know about plant IP mostly, but it veers off into activism sometimes too. But I have a blog called 3 Rookie Mistakes Plant Patent Applicants Make. And the number one rookie mistake that people make is they pick a great name for their variety. And then they forget to think about the fact that you cannot get a trademark on a generic name. And if a variety only has one name, that is by definition the generic name. So if you give a variety a name and you use that in your plant patent application, you're essentially giving up the opportunity to get a trademark on it. It's really important to give a variety. If you've got a trademark that you like, that you want to use in your advertising and everything, make sure you have another name that is generic. The reason for this is that you can never, trademark law is meant to help people identify a source of goods, but you're not allowed to take the best word for something out of the vernacular and appropriate it as your own property. And so, if you give a cultivar one name, that's the name the whole public has to be free to use without infringing a trademark. If you want to have trademark rights, it has to be separate from the cultivar name. So that's really important. I see that mistake all the time. And then I just think, well, should have called me. But if you fix it, there's a point at which you probably can fix it. In fact, we just took over a case that was like this, and we did an amendment to rename the cultivar something really generic so that we could rescue the trademark registrability of the sexy name. So that it can be done, but it depends on the timing, and you want to be really careful with it. But if you don't do that, you only call it one thing, and then you apply for a trademark, you'll get kicked right out. All right. I think that's kind of what all these point ones were about. So I think it's time probably for any of us to take questions. Yeah, in the back.
Hey, I'm the local Infinite Tree Hemp Nursery. I have a question for the representative of ODA. Quick question on the seed certification program. When you talked about the requirements that are being kind of rolled out for next year, they're in progress right now, February. You mentioned that there was going to be a pre-harvest report that would be required, I believe. But what about anything, because a lot of those happen very early for consumers, and is there anything that's going to happen maybe post-harvest on that seed lot so that we have more of an assurance for consumers? That's kind of the first part of my question. And then what about defining autoflower versus full season or photosensitive cultivars? Because there's a lot of sales that are happening in the market where those items, whether it's photosensitive or autoflower or high CBD, low CBD, aren't being addressed. Is there any way that your certification program can make sure that those are regulated terms applied to these products? I'm going to try to repeat that. Don't worry. Sorry. No. But I guess sort of to boil it down, what are sort of the additional regulatory aspects you're looking at besides just seed purity and seed feminization? Because we really need as an industry assurances around a post-harvest test of that material for CBD and its photosensitive. I think there's going to be more on the market that are kind of trying to flip through. So I'd love if you guys could address that. You're thinking about those at all.
Okay, so I'm just going to recap really broadly, and then I might need Mike's input on this as well. So the question is roughly around seed certification and if other characteristics are being considered beyond feminization and the usual things that are considered in certification programs. And so the ODA, I want to say first, does not run seed certification in Oregon. It's run by Oregon State University. So I'm not an expert. I sit on the advisory board, but it's their program. In general, certification programs for seed are sort of a systems approach to say that, the seed that went into the program is the seed that comes out, and it meets a certain standard of production, right? So that could be included isolation distances. It could include, no weeds, or, it's around those sorts of things. And so that's the basic for any seed kind. Hemp is an interesting challenge because of all these other issues that you just mentioned. From my conversations on the advisory board, I think feminization was the only thing so far that's been looked at being added, Mike? Yeah, and isolation distance, because that's not really, I guess, everything that you mentioned is very important for the quality of the seed that's being produced. It's just a little bit outside the scope of certification. And so in general, it is, it is, I saw your face. it just is what it is, and doesn't mean that, Oregon or another state couldn't add those things, and those conversations could be had. But you start creeping outside what certification is meant to do. Doesn't mean there couldn't be another program that would attest to those things, but I think that's, I think that's it, where it is. And then, yeah, go ahead, because I think there was a couple things I missed. And we're,
But for other crops, aren't there other aspects of the production value of that crop that are part of certification, or is it just purity and isolation?
it's mainly just purity and isolation distance, because there are a couple. I know there is one seed kind that it's escaping me where they look at herbicide resistance or traits like that, but those are very unique. So it doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. It just Sure. Yeah.
I think what she's asking about is other things involved, like potatoes, for example, have the field inspection and the drill out after the,
Those things would still happen, yeah.
those are the things she's asking.
Oh, well, sorry, those are so having a field inspection and a grow out and, those are basic tenets of certification. So those do happen or would happen in this program. But I don't know if that's answering, and I'm being cut off. So come talk to me and Mike and we can hash this out.